The man's voice carried across the entire dining room before he even reached the host stand. Not the kind of voice that fills a space with warmth, the kind that empties it. Conversations dropped at the nearest tables. A busser near the bread station slowed down without realizing it. Even the background music, something low and jazzy that the general manager had specifically chosen to create the illusion of calm, seemed to pull back a degree. Nadia Holt heard it before she saw him. She was coming out of the dry storage room with a clipboard tucked under her arm and a note from the pastry chef she hadn't finished reading when the voice reached her through the kitchen's swing door. She pushed through anyway. The man was standing at the host stand with the posture of someone who had decided in advance that this experience was going to disappoint him. Late 50s, expensive jacket, the kind of haircut that cost $300 to look like it cost nothing. He was pointing at something on the reservation screen that the host, a 23-year-old named Tatum with excellent instincts and very little armor yet, was trying her best to address. "This is unacceptable," he said. Not loudly enough to be a scene, but loudly enough that everyone within 15 feet understood they were witnessing one. "I specifically requested the corner booth. I made that request when I booked the reservation 6 weeks ago. I have a business dinner tonight. Do you understand what that means?" Tatum opened her mouth. "I'm sure you don't," the man continued. Nadia crossed the dining room without rushing. She had learned a long time ago that rushing toward a difficult guest only signaled that you were already on the defensive, and she had no intention of being on the defensive tonight or any other night. "Good evening." She stopped beside Tatum, not in front of her. Beside. It mattered. "My name is Nadia. I'm the floor manager this evening. Can I help you?" The man turned to assess her the way some people assess rooms, looking for what wasn't up to standard before deciding whether to stay. "The corner booth," he said. "I requested it 6 weeks ago. I see that in the notes," she said, glancing at the screen without making a production of it. "Unfortunately, that booth was held for you until 7:15. It's now 7:42, and we had a party waiting." He stared at her. "I was held up. Traffic. Of course." Nadia kept her tone exactly where she needed it. Not warm, not cold, functional in the way of someone who was going to solve this. "What I can offer you is the round table by the east window. It seats 4 comfortably. You'll have full privacy on 2 sides, and the view of the courtyard is actually better than the corner. Or I can check whether the private dining room in the back is still available for the evening." He looked at her. That look again, calculating whether she was worth his attention or just another obstacle. "The private room," he said. She nodded once and reached for the reservation system. "I'll need about 4 minutes to confirm with the kitchen. Can I have someone bring you a drink at the bar while you wait?" He didn't thank her, but he moved toward the bar, which was its own kind of answer. Tatum let out a breath. "How do you do that?" Nadia handed back the clipboard. "Document the booth situation in the log and remind the team, if a reservation is more than 20 minutes late without contact, the hold expires. It's not a judgment call, it's the policy." Tatum nodded, still processing. Nadia was already moving. What she didn't notice, because she was already 3 steps into her next task, was the man at the table who had stopped reading the menu about 4 minutes ago and hadn't picked it back up. Wesley Carr watched her cross the dining room the way he sometimes watched construction sites, noting the structure underneath, the decisions being made in real time that most people would never see. He had arrived early for dinner alone, which his assistant had suggested, and he had agreed to without much thought, because his calendar had been merciless for the past 2 weeks, and sitting in a restaurant by himself for an hour sounded, improbably, like the best thing available to him. He had been watching the room instead of the menu ever since. He signaled his server. "The woman who just handled that situation at the host stand," he said. "What's her role here?" "Floor manager," the server said. "Nadia. She runs the whole front of house when the GM is off-site." Wesley turned back to the menu and smiled to himself in the way that people do when they've seen something they weren't expecting to find. The private dining room was available. Nadia confirmed it, had it reset in 11 minutes, and personally walked the difficult guest to the door at 7:56, which meant he was seated before his business associates arrived at 8. He didn't acknowledge this. She hadn't expected him to. She was back at the host stand reviewing the 9 o'clock seating chart when she became aware of someone standing nearby who wasn't waiting to be seated. She looked up. Wesley Carr was not the kind of man who filled a doorway. He was the kind who made you notice there was a doorway. Medium height, dark jacket, a watchfulness in his expression that suggested he spent more time listening than talking and had gotten very good at it. "I had a question," he said, "not a complaint." Nadia waited. "Is there a tactful version of what you just did, or were you born knowing how to end a scene before it becomes one?" She looked at him for 2 seconds. There's a form on the website for compliments. It goes directly to the general manager. He didn't smile, but something shifted in his face. The particular expression of someone who had expected any answer but that one and was quietly pleased to have been surprised. Understood, he said. Good evening. He went back to his table. Nadia went back to the seating chart. She spent the next 10 minutes trying to locate the specific thought that was bothering her and eventually concluded that it was the fact that the conversation had lasted 40 seconds and hadn't quite felt finished. She did not think about that again, or she tried not to. The note arrived the next afternoon through the restaurant's reservation system. A booking for 2, this Saturday 7 p.m., under the name W. Carr, with an additional note in the comments field. The corner booth, if available, it read. Though I've been told the east window is better. I'd like a second opinion from someone qualified to give one. Nadia read it twice. She showed it to no one. She confirmed the reservation, assigned the east window table, and went back to her afternoon. This is not a complication, she told herself, in the voice she used for problems that were already becoming one. Saturday came anyway. Wesley arrived at 7, and the woman with him was not a romantic partner. Nadia understood this within 30 seconds of watching them interact. It was the particular ease of people who have known each other long enough to stop performing, which in this case meant the woman spent most of the first 10 minutes telling Wesley exactly what she thought of the renovation. He was apparently planning for a building in the warehouse district, and Wesley took notes on his phone without looking remotely defensive. The woman's name, she learned from the reservation note, was Beverly. By 7:45, Beverly had flagged down a server to ask about the butter, and Nadia happened to be passing when the question became complicated. She stopped. She answered. Beverly looked at her with the specific attention of someone who had just registered something. You're the one who put us at this table, Beverly said, instead of the corner. I made a recommendation. The final choice was yours. Beverly looked at Wesley. See, she said, that's what I mean. Wesley looked at Nadia. Beverly continued, he doesn't know how to make decisions that aren't data-driven. He needs to practice deferring to people who actually have opinions. Wesley set down his water glass. Beverly, she's not wrong, Nadia said, and was gone before either of them could respond. She heard Beverly laugh from halfway across the dining room. The note came on Tuesday. Paper this time. Not the reservation system, not a standard comment card. A folded piece of cardstock left with the hostess at the front door, addressed to the floor manager. Inside, 3 sentences. The east window was better. You were right, and I was wrong about the table. If you're ever interested in applying that instinct to a different kind of problem, I'd like to hear your thoughts on a space I'm redesigning. No obligation. W. Carr, a business card, was attached. Wesley Carr, Card Development Group. A phone number and an address in the financial district. Nadia read it standing at the host's stand with the dinner service beginning to build around her. She placed it in her jacket pocket. She went back to work. She didn't call that day, or the next. On Thursday, she found herself walking past the address on the card, which she would later acknowledge was not entirely a coincidence, and looked up at the building, glass and steel, 12 stories, with scaffolding along the lower floors where something was clearly in the middle of being changed. A renovation that hadn't decided yet what it was becoming. She kept walking. On Friday, she called. He answered on the second ring, which she had not expected. I'm not looking for a job, she said before he could speak. I want to be clear about that. He was quiet for a moment. All right, but I do have opinions about that building. She looked at her coffee. The scaffolding tells me you're rethinking the ground floor, but the windows above it don't match what you'd need for the kind of space I think you're trying to create. I noticed from the street. Another pause. Can you come by Saturday morning? I have a brunch service until 1:30 then. She went. The building was more interesting inside than outside, which was the problem. The bones were exceptional, and someone had spent 20 years covering them up with choices that prioritized expense over sense. Exposed brick behind suspended ceiling panels. Original hardwood floors under 3 layers of commercial tile. An atrium on the second floor that no one had opened in a decade because the access point had been converted into storage. Wesley walked her through all of it with the same quality she'd noticed in the rest. Present, attentive, not talking to fill space. He asked questions more than he explained. He showed her the blueprints, not to impress her, but because he seemed to actually want her to look at them. This corridor, she said after 20 minutes of walking. You're planning to keep it closed? That's the current design. He pointed to the blueprint. Separate the commercial tenants from the residential entrance. It isolates the ground floor. She looked at the space. You have 12 feet of ceiling height and natural light from the north. If you open this wall, the coffee tenant you're planning for the corner suddenly has a reason for people to walk through, instead of around. Your foot traffic triples and the residential tenants feel like they're living somewhere interesting instead of somewhere managed. Wesley stood in the corridor for a moment looking at the wall. The architect said it wasn't worth the structural cost, he said. What did the structural engineer say? He looked at her. He didn't answer right away, and she could see from the quality of his silence that the structural engineer had not actually been asked. You speak like someone who's thought about this a lot, he said. She shrugged. I've managed dining rooms for 8 years. The difference between a restaurant that works and one that doesn't usually comes down to how people move through a space. Same principle applies here. Wesley folded the blueprint. He looked at her with that attentive, measuring expression. How long have you been? At Oleander? And before that? Boston. 3 years as assistant at a hotel restaurant. Before that, I worked front of house starting at 19 to put myself through a program in hospitality design. I left after 2 semesters because the job paid better than the degree. He was quiet for a moment. Why did you come today? She had thought about this. She gave him the honest version. Because I've spent 4 years being very good at someone else's dining room, and I wanted to see what it would feel like to have an opinion that mattered outside of it. Wesley nodded slowly. She got the sense he was filing that away somewhere careful. I'll talk to the structural engineer about the corridor, he said. She handed back the blueprints. Good. Let me know what he says. She left, and she spent the drive back cataloging why that conversation had felt different from most conversations she had, and arrived at no clean conclusion except that it had. She was back at Oleander for the Saturday dinner service when Marcus Webb, one of the sous chefs, appeared at the pass-through with an expression that in Nadia's experience meant he had heard something and was deciding how to rank it. You know who that was, right? He said. The guy you met with today. She looked at him. How do you know about that? Because Fletcher told Bria, and Bria told literally everyone. He raised his eyebrows. Wesley Carr. His family owns half the restaurant real estate in this city, Nadia. The building on 5th where we source our linen supplier. The block on Merchant where they're putting up the new hotel. He's not a developer. He's the developer. Nadia absorbed this, and nothing. Just thought you should know what you walked into. She thanked him for the information and went back to the service. She didn't change how she thought about the meeting, but she added it to the picture. The second meeting was at the site again a week later. Wesley had spoken to the structural engineer. The corridor conversion was in fact feasible. The cost was lower than the architect had estimated. He showed her the revised numbers with the composure of someone who had been wrong before and did not need to make an event of admitting it. He had also brought coffee, which he handed to her without asking if she wanted one. She noticed. She let it go because it was true that she did want one. They spent 2 hours going through the second floor. She had opinions about the atrium. He had questions about the lighting design that she answered from memory. Citing 3 restaurants where the same north-facing window situation had been solved differently, each with its own trade-offs. At one point he stopped and looked at her. Did you study design? No. She sipped the coffee. But I've eaten in a lot of restaurants and I pay attention. You see spaces like a story, he said, more to himself. She glanced at him. What does that mean? It means you don't see what's there. You see what it's supposed to be. He looked back at the atrium. It's not common. She looked at the atrium too. It's just a different way of being dissatisfied. He almost laughed. Almost. What she didn't see, because she was looking at the ceiling joists, was that his phone had silently lit up twice with a message from a contact saved as D. Vance. She wouldn't have known the name. She had no reason to. But the person who sent those messages had a very specific interest in who Wesley Carr was spending his Wednesday afternoons with, and an equally specific idea about what to do with that information. Donovan Vance had been Wesley's director of acquisitions for 6 years. He knew Wesley's schedule better than Wesley's assistant did. He knew which projects Wesley cared about personally and which ones he delegated. He knew that when Wesley started taking site meetings without telling anyone what he was reviewing, it meant the project was becoming something more than professional, and that in Donovan's experience, things that became personal were things that could be influenced. He'd found out about Nadia Holt in the way that people in that position find out about things, not through any single piece of information, but through the accumulation of small ones. The reservation, the note on cardstock, the 2 Saturday visits to the Merchant Street site, a conversation between Wesley's assistant and the site manager that Donovan had no business overhearing and had overheard anyway. He typed a name into the search field of a professional database he had access to for acquisition research. Nadia Holt, Oleander Restaurant, Boston before that. A gap in employment 3 years ago that the database didn't explain. He made a note of that. He kept looking. The gap was the interesting part. Nadia found out about the gap being interesting on a Thursday, in the break room at Oleander, from a conversation she was not supposed to hear. She had come in early for a delivery confirmation and was passing the staff break room when she caught her own name, in a voice she recognized as belonging to one of the line cooks who had been there longer than she had, and had very little filter on what he considered private conversation. She stopped outside the door. "Car's guy has been asking questions about her," the voice was saying. "About why she left Boston." "You know why she left Boston?" A second voice, lower. "Something about a lawsuit? Someone sued the restaurant?" She stayed in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, then she walked in. The two men looked up. The color left faces at the specific speed knew exactly what they've just done. She poured her coffee. She looked at both of them steadily. "What exactly has been going around?" The line cook, to his credit, told her directly. A guy named Donovan had apparently been making calls, asking about her background. The Boston situation, a civil suit involving a former employer that had been dismissed but had existed, had come up. He'd been telling people at the restaurant, not just at the restaurant, in the broader industry network, that Wesley Carr was spending his time with someone who had a complicated past and that Wesley might not know what he was getting into. Nadia set down her cup. She had known the Boston situation would come up eventually. She had not expected it to come up like this. She went to the dining room. She sat at a corner table with her phone and called the one person who she knew would tell her the truth without editorializing. Her former manager in Boston answered on the third ring. She explained what she'd heard. There was a pause. "The suit was dismissed," he said. "You know that. I know that. Does this person know that?" "He will if anyone checks a public record. But if someone's making calls instead of checking records, they're not interested in the facts." She thanked him. She hung up. Then she sent a message to Wesley Carr. "I need 5 minutes with you today." "Not about the building," he replied. "In 4 minutes. Come to the office at 3. The Carr Development Group office was on the 14th floor of a building that Wesley's family had owned for 20 years. And had never quite finished deciding what to do with, which she considered a telling detail. The reception area was understated in the particular way of places that had stopped needing to prove anything. The assistant showed her to a conference room with a view of the river. Wesley was there when she arrived. He wasn't behind a desk. He was at the window. He turned when she came in. She sat without being asked. He did the same. "I'll be direct," she said. "It's the only way I know how to do this. Go ahead. Someone on your team has been making calls about me, about my background, about a civil situation in Boston that was dismissed 3 years ago. That information is now circulating in the industry attached to my name, in a way that didn't come from me and wasn't accurate." She placed her hands flat on the table. "I'm telling you before you hear it from someone else, because I'd rather you get the facts from me than a version that someone shaped to mean something it doesn't." She met his eyes. "Do you know who's been making the calls?" Wesley's expression didn't change in any way she could name, but she sensed something shift in it. The specific shift of someone hearing a version of a story that confirms what they had already suspected and hated to suspect. "What was the situation?" he asked. She told him, all of it. The restaurant in Boston, the owner who had managed the payroll incorrectly for 2 years, and then when it came to light, had attempted to hold Nadia responsible for it in a civil suit that his own lawyer had advised against filing. The dismissal 6 months later. The year she had spent afterward quietly rebuilding because the industry is small and stories travel faster than corrections. Wesley was quiet for a moment. He asked 2 follow-up questions, both precise. She answered them. "I want to be clear about one thing," he said. She waited. "I didn't ask for a background check. I didn't authorize anyone on my team to make calls about you. I know that." She said it without drama, simply stating it. "If I thought you had, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be having a different conversation with a different kind of lawyer." Something in Wesley's face shifted again, in a different direction this time. "Who do you think it was?" he asked. She had her guess. She kept it to herself. "That's for you to determine. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to make sure the facts are on the table before anything else happens." Wesley stood up. He went to the window for a moment. He came back. "Nadia." She had noticed he used her name carefully, rarely, and when it seemed to mean something. "Thank you for coming to me directly. It's all I know how to do," she said, and stood to leave. She was at the door when he said her name again. "The Boston situation," he said. "It doesn't change anything about what I've seen from you." "Good," she said, "because it shouldn't." She left. She spent the elevator ride down trying to identify the specific sensation of having done the right thing, and having no idea what it was going to cost her. There wasn't a clean name for it. She settled on something close to clarity, mixed with something close to dread. She was at work that evening, halfway through the Saturday dinner service when she found out. Marcus appeared at the pass-through with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. "Donovan Vance," he said low. "He came in for dinner tonight. He's been talking to people at the bar." She looked at him. "What people?" "Industry people. There's a fundraiser event next month, the Hospitality Association dinner. He's apparently on the planning committee. He's been suggesting to people that the restaurant's floor manager has some history that the ownership might want to know about." Nadia set down the clipboard. She understood now. It wasn't just about her personally. Donovan had found a lever, her connection to Wesley, her professional reputation, the fact that her name was now attached to a development project in a city where everyone in the industry knew everyone, and he had decided to pull it in a room full of people who could amplify it before anyone thought to verify it. She went out to the dining room. She didn't go to the bar. She went to the table where Donovan Vance was seated because she had asked the hostess to find out where he was seated, and she had been in the restaurant industry long enough to walk directly into a conversation rather than wait for it to find her. Donovan Vance was in his early 40s with the ease of someone who was used to being the most informed person in any room. He looked up when she stopped at his table. He recognized her from the way his expression recalibrated. "Mr. Vance." She kept her voice at the same temperature she used for difficult guests. "I'm Nadia Holt. I'm the floor manager here. I know who you are." "Then I'll skip the introduction." She placed one hand on the back of the empty chair across from him. She did not sit. "I've heard that you've been sharing information about my professional history with people in this industry. I want to give you the opportunity to tell me what you've said and to who before the situation goes any further." He sat back. His expression was the particular expression of someone who has been caught mid-move and is deciding whether to retreat or accelerate. "I made some calls," he said, "professional due diligence. When someone starts taking up a significant amount of a principal's time, it's reasonable to circulate incomplete information as though it were fact." She said this without sharpness, with precision. "The civil case you've been referencing was dismissed. That's a matter of public record. The information circulating is not." He smiled, slightly. The kind of smile that's meant to look assured and reads as nervous. "You're very composed for someone in your position." "I'm composed because I have nothing to hide," she met his eyes. "And because I'd rather do this in a dining room than in a lawyer's office, but I'm perfectly comfortable with the second option if you prefer it." The table next to them had gone quiet. Donovan Vance looked at her for a long moment. He picked up his water glass. He set it down. "I was looking out for the company's interests," he said. "It wasn't personal. It became personal the moment my name went into a conversation I wasn't invited to." She straightened. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Vance." She walked away. She did not look back. The dining room resumed its normal volume approximately 4 seconds after she cleared the bar area. Marcus, from the kitchen pass-through, caught her eye as she came back through. He said nothing. He gave her a single nod that communicated everything it needed to. She went back to work. What she didn't know was that Wesley Carr had been seated at the bar for the past 20 minutes. He had come in without a reservation, which his assistant had apparently tried to explain was not how Oleander worked, and the host had seated him anyway because Wesley Carr had that quality, the ability to turn impracticality into a reasonable request simply by not drawing attention to it. He had ordered one drink. He had been watching. He had seen all of it. When Nadia came back to the host stand after the last of the 9 o'clock tables had been seated, he was there. She stopped. "You watched that," she said. He nodded. "I came to talk to you and I didn't want to interrupt." She looked toward the dining room. She looked back at him. "Donovan, I spoke with him this morning," Wesley said. "He's been with the company for 6 years. He knows my schedule better than I do. And he decided, apparently, that a problem he'd identified was his to solve. And he resigned this afternoon before I had the chance to have the full conversation about that decision." Nadia let that settle. She studied Wesley's expression, which was controlled in the way of someone who had done something difficult and wasn't looking for acknowledgement of it. "I came to apologize," he said, "for the fact that my professional life created a situation that damaged your professional reputation. It shouldn't have happened, and it happened because of my proximity. I'm sorry." She didn't answer immediately. She had learned that silence was a useful tool, especially when someone had just said something that deserved to sit in the air for a moment. "That was a real apology," she said. "I've had occasion to learn the difference." She looked at him. The dining room hummed behind her. Someone at table 7 needed the dessert menu. She knew this because she always knew what was happening in her dining room, even when she was having a different conversation. "I'm still angry," she said. "Not at you, at the situation." "I know, my name is in conversations I can't take it back from." "I know that too." He held her gaze. "I'd like to help you put a different version of your name in those same conversations, if you'll let me." She thought about this. "What does that specifically the Hospitality Association dinner?" he said. "Next month." Donovan was on the planning committee. "I'm one of the event sponsors. I'd like you to come as my guest, not as a representative of Oleander." She stared at him. "You want to take me to the dinner where people have been hearing the wrong version of this story. I want to take you to the dinner where you can give them the right one." Nadia thought about the dining room she managed, the way she had learned that the best response to a bad situation was almost always presence. Showing up, staying level, making it impossible for the story to run unchecked. "All right," she said. He nodded. "I'll have the details sent over." "And Wesley," she said before he could turn. He stopped. "If anyone asks me about Boston, I'll tell them the truth. The whole truth. Not a managed version. I wouldn't want anything else." She went back to the dining room. The dessert menu reached table 7. The service continued. She did not think about the dinner for the rest of the evening. She was too busy working. She thought about it the entire drive home. The association dinner was held on a Friday evening in the event space of a hotel that had recently renovated its ballroom and not entirely gotten the lighting right, which Nadia noticed immediately and filed away as a professional observation and not a criticism, or not entirely. She arrived alone because she had told Wesley she would meet him there. She was not an accessory to someone else's entrance. She was her own entrance, or she wasn't one at all. She wore a dress that she'd owned for 2 years and never quite found the right occasion for. A deep blue that was not trying to compete with anything in the room. She had her hair down, which was unusual for her in professional contexts, and had decided that unusual was appropriate for tonight. The room recognized her faster than she expected. Not with welcome, exactly. With that particular awareness that moves through a crowd when someone arrives who has been discussed. She felt it in the slight recalibrations, conversations that continued but shifted angle, eye contact that lasted a beat longer than necessary. She got a drink. She found a position near the window where she could see the room without being cornered by any one section of it. Wesley found her at 8:15. He did not come from across the room with the energy of someone making a statement. He came from the side with 2 water glasses in the calm way of someone who had located the person he was looking for and didn't need to perform the finding of them. "You've been standing here for 20 minutes, he said. "I've been working the room from a fixed position," she said. "It's more efficient." He handed her the water. She noted that he had brought water without asking whether she wanted it. She noted also that she did want it. A man in a gray suit appeared at Wesley's elbow almost immediately. Older, with the social ease of someone who had been going to these events for decades and moved through them like a current. He greeted Wesley and then looked at Nadia with the specific attention of someone doing a rapid reassessment. "This is Nadia Holt," Wesley said. "She's been consulting on the Merchant Street redesign." The man's expression shifted, the positive shift, the one that happens when information realigns in a favorable direction. Nadia found herself in 3 conversations in the next 40 minutes, each of which began with some version of the wrong version of the story she'd been told she was here to correct and ended with something closer to the actual one. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She simply offered the facts with the same quality she brought to difficult guests. Not as ammunition, but as information. As something simply true that was worth knowing. By 9 o'clock she could feel the temperature of the room changing. An older woman, silver hair, direct eyes, the bearing of someone who had built something herself and hadn't forgotten what it cost, stopped her near the entrance to the terrace. "I heard something about you 2 weeks ago," the woman said. "I also heard something tonight. The tonight version is more interesting." "Thank you," Nadia said. The woman looked at her carefully. "Are you the one who redesigned the atrium on Merchant Street?" "Recommended, not redesigned. The architect deserves the credit." The woman smiled. "The right answer. I'm Vera." They shook hands. She didn't find out until later that Vera Ashton sat on the board of 3 hospitality foundations, one of which funded a program for first-generation professionals entering the industry. But the evening had a way of revealing itself in layers, and she was still in the middle of the first one. Wesley appeared beside her again at 9:30, in the particular way of someone who had been tracking the room without appearing to. "You're good at this," he said. "I told you. I've been in the industry since I was 19. This is just work." "You don't find it exhausting?" she considered. The version where I'm defending myself is exhausting. The version where I'm just telling the truth is fine. It's easier to keep track of, Wesley smiled. A real one, the kind she'd seen briefly before and now had enough data points to recognize as rare. It changed his face in a specific way that she noted and chose not to comment on. The music had shifted to something slower. Two couples near the center of the room had drifted into a loose approximation of dancing. "Are you planning to circulate more?" she asked. "Or is this where you've decided to stay?" "This is where I've decided to stay," he said. She looked at the room, the window. The version of San Francisco that existed from the 14th floor of a hotel that hadn't gotten its lighting quite right but had, somehow, gotten enough right for a Friday evening. "Then stay," she said. They didn't dance. But they stood near the window for the next hour and talked about the Merchant Street project, about the atrium, about a restaurant in Boston she had loved, and a building in Seattle he had once evaluated and decided against, and always slightly regretted. At some point the water glass in her hand became a second one that she didn't remember accepting. At 10:45, her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "You know who Vera Ashton is, right?" She looked at the message. She looked at the room where Vera was now talking to Wesley with the focused energy of someone who had found the conversation she had come for. She typed back, "Tell me." His response came in 30 seconds. She looked up from the phone. Vera Ashton ran the largest independent restaurant group on the West Coast for 20 years before she sold it and started a foundation for exactly the kind of person you are. Nadia stood with that for a moment. Then she put her phone away, picked up her water glass, and walked toward the conversation. The Merchant Street building opened 7 months later. The corridor was open. The atrium was restored. The ground floor coffee tenant had a line out the door by 9 every morning, which the residential tenants had apparently started to use as a point of pride when describing where they lived. Nadia was not at the opening, technically. She was standing outside it, on the sidewalk, having arrived 10 minutes early and not yet gone in, because she had spent the past 3 months consulting on the space in a capacity that had become formalized. An agreement between her and Car Development that she had read 3 times and signed on a Tuesday afternoon in Wesley's office while his assistant brought coffee she hadn't asked for and had wanted. She was not an employee of Car Development. She had been clear about that. She was still the floor manager at Oleander. She was also now something that didn't have a title on a business card yet but felt more like the right shape of her than most things had in a long time. Wesley appeared at the building entrance. He saw her on the sidewalk. He came out. "You're outside," he said. "I arrived early. The event started 8 minutes ago." She looked at the building. At the glass facade, the open corridor visible from the street through the window, the atrium catching the morning light in exactly the way she had said it would. She had a specific feeling about that, not pride, exactly, something quieter and more durable. "You were right about the wall," he said. "I know." He stood beside her for a moment. "About the whole thing, actually. The corridor, the atrium, the north light." She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. "I have a proposal," she said. He waited. "There's a space in the building, the 2nd floor, east end. You haven't committed to a tenant yet." "That's correct. I think it should be a design studio." She had thought about how to say this for 2 weeks and had decided that the direct version was the only one worth offering. Not a restaurant, not retail. A space for people who work in hospitality design and don't have the overhead yet to operate independently. Shared resources, subsidized rates, access to the industry network you have. I'd run it. I'd also keep Oleander, at least for the transition, because that's the kind of professional I am. Wesley was quiet for a long moment. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "About the space specifically, 2 weeks. About the idea behind it, closer to 4 years. He looked at the building. She did too. "Are you asking for my permission or my participation?" he said. "Your resources," she said. "I'm asking for your resources. The participation part is something we can discuss separately." Wesley turned to look at her. That specific expression, the analytical one that had been there since the dining room, had reached a conclusion she could see clearly now that she'd had enough time to learn his face. "You're very difficult," he said, not as criticism. "I've been told," she said. "Does it help that I'm also usually right?" "It does and it doesn't," he said. He looked at the building, the lobby through the glass, the corridor that shouldn't have worked and did. "All right. Let's go in and you can tell me what the 2nd floor needs." She didn't move immediately, the way she had gotten very precise over the years about the timing of things. "Wesley," she said. He stopped. "I want to finish the conversation from the event last month, the one your phone interrupted." He looked at her. "The version where you were about to say something and didn't." He was quiet for 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds had the same weight as a much longer silence. Then he closed the distance between them on the sidewalk, with the city making its usual noise all around them and the building they had rebuilt between them catching the morning light. And he said what he'd been working up to for the better part of 4 months, which was simpler than either of them had made it sound. And then, because timing is its own kind of architecture, she answered. The design studio opened the following spring. Nadia ran it from the second-floor east end of the Merchant Street building, which turned out to have better natural light than she had originally estimated and worse acoustics than she would have liked, and which she spent the first 3 months fixing on a budget she had negotiated herself. Vera Ashton was on the advisory board, a fact that still made Marcus from Oleander slightly speechless when he visited for the first time. "You know who Vera Ashton is," Nadia said, handing him a coffee. "You could have mentioned this sooner," he said. "You could have asked." He sat down in one of the studio's shared workspace chairs and looked around at the space. The open plan, the north light, the 12-foot ceilings that had been buried under drop tiles for 2 decades. "How did you know this would work?" he asked. She sat across from him. "I didn't, but I knew the bones were good." "That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I've got," she said. "Most of the spaces worth building start as an argument about a wall." Marcus thought about this. He drank his coffee. Outside, through the window that looked out at the corridor, the open corridor, the one that connected rather than divided, the foot traffic moved in both directions. The coffee tenant downstairs had its usual morning line. The residential tenants came and went. The building did what buildings are supposed to do when someone pays attention to the space between the walls. Nadia had learned a long time ago, in her first dining room, in her second, in the year she spent rebuilding a reputation that someone else tried to take, that the things worth keeping were the things you could look at honestly and say, "Yes, that is exactly what it is." No apology for the material. No apology for the structure. Just the fact of it standing in the light. She had kept that. She kept it still.